Good evening and welcome to tonight's program on the bridges of the Merritt Parkway. My name is Ann Thompson. I'm the Assistant Director for Public Services here at the Essex Library, and I'm delighted to welcome Wes Haynes, Executive Director of the Merritt Parkway Conservancy, to our Zoom stage tonight. As you'll see, I've posted a quick poll so that to have you let me know how many people are sharing your screen with you tonight. That way I can give accurate statistics to the Connecticut State Library at the end of the year. We have a few house rules tonight. Please, we are going to be recording the talk tonight, and we will be sharing it with everybody who registered and also folks who go to our YouTube station. We have a channel there that will have this on it for the foreseeable future. We are going to ask you to keep your cameras off to preserve the bandwidth and to make that recording very, very clear. And I would ask that you type any questions you might have as they occur to you into the chat, and we will get to them afterwards. And it looks like everybody has responded to that poll, so thank you very much for that. And we're going to close that out. And I would like to give you a quick introduction to Wes Haynes. He is the Conservancy's Executive Director since 2018, and he grew up driving the Merritt Parkway. He previously held senior staff positions with the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation, the New York Landmarks Conservancy, Preservation League of New York State, and the New Jersey Historic Trust. He's a Stamford native and resident, and he taught historic preservation at the Parsons School of Design in New York, the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, and the Brooklyn High School for the Arts. Welcome, Wes. I'm truly delighted and honored to have you here on our stage tonight.
Thank you, Anne, and good evening, everyone. We are going to take a pretty quick trip through the bridges of the Merritt Parkway tonight, and hopefully, let's see. I'm having problems advancing. There, okay, now we're okay. So it'll be a virtual tour. Parkway is, as I'm sure everybody has been on it at least once, even up in your part of the state. It's a highway. It's a limited access highway and one of the major arteries through Connecticut. But it's also listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it gets special treatment that other highways don't get in Connecticut. And tonight we're going to slow down a little bit and take a look at some of the bridges. But first, I just want to define exactly what the Parkway is, and that is the stretch of the Parkway that is between the New York line and the Housatonic River at Sikorsky, the Sikorsky plant. That was the first leg of it. It was extended in 1940 with what we call the Wilbur Cross Parkway today. That was really part of the original plan. But the Wilbur Cross was not listed on the National Register. And I think next time you drive them, you could just maybe take a look and compare the condition and the quality of the environment of the two. The Merritt gets special kid glove treatment. The Wilbur Cross is still a beautiful road, but it isn't given the same level of care by the Connecticut Department of Transportation as the Merritt is. The Merritt is 39.5 miles long. It was proposed as an alternate road to Route 1 in 1924 by Schuyler Merritt, who was then a congressman from Fairfield County, representing Jim Hymes's district today. And he was an industrialist. He wanted to separate trucks and car traffic, and the cars were the easier thing to move to the northern part of Fairfield County. It's only 6 miles in from the shore, but the made travel route was along Route 1, and to let the trucks move freely between the industrial plants along the Sound. It took a long time for the Parkway to get realized, and it was finally, a financing plan was finally put together in 1934. The design started then. It was completed in 1940. So most of it was built between the years 1936 and 1940 in that 4-year period. It was put on the National Register of Historic Places in 1991 after DOT was starting to intervene with the Parkway and do some very large Parkway interchanges that were very unpark-like. And people in Fairfield County rose up with the aid of the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation and got the Parkway listed on the National Register. Then the National Register changed the way that funding was deployed on the Parkway. From that point on, CONDOT had to be restorative in all the work it did, rather than just come in and think of the Parkway as a blank slate, the way we treat I-84 and I-90 and I-95. And it really required a level of treatment that was more restorative. And the Merritt Parkway Conservancy, my organization, was founded in 2002. We're starting our 20th year now. We've been very much involved with all the work on the Parkway. Our chairman, Peter Malkin, has been chair for 20 years and has been really guided the Conservancy through all the work that we've been doing in partnership with DOT. We're a completely nonprofit private organization. We receive no public funding. We're supported completely by private funds. And we'll look at some of the work on the tour tonight that we've been doing on the Parkway. So there were 69 original bridges built on the Parkway, and all but 2 of them are still in place. 2 of them have been demolished over the years, but we do have basically the large set. And this was this drawing was the original concept that the landscape team and the architect of the bridges and the civil engineers that laid out the road put together. It was really quite a team effort. It was to be this beautiful winding road that knitted its way through the Connecticut landscape. And the bridges were kept intentionally low, not as Robert Caro said that Robert Moses wanted in Long Island to keep buses from using it. But the traffic was limited to cars, and the roads were kept low to blend it into the landscape better, so that we wouldn't have to have very high bridges crossing the beautiful rolling hills of Fairfield County. And each of the bridges on the Parkway was done to a different design. No 2 are alike. They deploy mostly the same structural system, but they are given a completely different architectural treatment. And tonight we're going to focus on how the architect who designed them really dressed them up in different ways. The structural system that is used is no longer used in constructing bridges, but it was a very modern system in the 1930s. It's called a rigid frame. And in the center image here, the red lines outline the shape of the steel that's embedded within the concrete. So these are a form of reinforced concrete bridges that have structural framing within it that's made out of steel. And as you can see, those the way that the steel is laid out, because it kind of gets narrower towards the center of the span, it lends itself to forming the openings as arches. And the architect of the Parkway Bridges made very good use of that arched form throughout the Parkway Bridges. There are some other systems, structural systems used in very minor quantities on the Parkway. These are all contemporary with what was going on in Europe at the time, the German Autobahn, which is up in the upper left-hand corner. That would become the design standard for the interstate highway system in the 1950s, but it wasn't really used on the Parkway. But you know, if you can look up at the upper left corner and see the future that was going on in Europe, but it was actually rejected by the design intent of the Merritt Parkway. There are a couple of basically post and beam bridges, and one of those is in Riverbank Road. You drive over that when you're on the Parkway, so you don't actually see it unless you're underneath the Parkway. And there are only a couple of structural arches that are used on the Parkway. And one of those is the Guinea Road Bridge in Stamford, which was one of the earliest bridges. And the Parkway Commission that oversaw the work originally wanted to dress up most of the Parkway bridges in stone, but the cost of this bridge came in so high that they decided that they would go to concrete afterwards to save money. It was designed in conjunction by the civil engineer on the project, Leslie Summer, who was a brilliant civil engineer who did many, many other bridges around Connecticut, and George Dunkelberger, an architect whose primary body of work is limited to the Merritt Parkway, to the bridges and the service areas that were originally designed as gas stations on the Parkway. One of the biggest accomplishment, the largest span and the highest span that the Parkway needed was across the Saugatuck River, not necessarily the largest river in Fairfield County, but where the Parkway met the river, it didn't make sense to bring the Parkway down to the river and go with a smaller bridge. So they spanned it with a larger type of bridge called an open spandrel arch system. That was pioneered by Charles Eiffel of the Eiffel Tower fame and used about 50 years later on the Parkway. It's the same structural principles. It's a very beautiful bridge, but you only really get to see it if you're in a kayak or a canoe down on the Saugatuck River. You drive over it with most of the time without ever knowing you're on this beautiful bridge. The architect was George Dunkelberger. He was a native of Camden, New Jersey. He came up in a working class family. He went to Drexel Institute, which was one of three institutions that were set up to help people of modest means get an education in a practical profession. Drexel is like Pratt Institute and Cooper Union in that sense. Drexel was different because it gave a very rounded sort of a liberal arts menu of courses, as well as what you wanted to focus on. Dunkelberger focused on architecture, but he got a very well-rounded education there. So he was pretty well read in the classics and other things. This was the entryway he went under, entered through every day. And it's a generation of architectural vocabulary that's earlier than what the Merritt Parkway did, but it sort of is a way he would treat the bridges when it came time for him to design them. And down the lower left-hand corner is a commercial building that he designed. He was in practice for a short time in Hartford before the crash, doing modest buildings like this. They're sort of, you can see sort of some of the massing in this building of what would be the Merritt Parkway. This is the only picture that we have of him. It was taken on his wedding day, and we don't really have a whole lot of information on Dunkelberger. Now, there are many rumors you may have heard that the bridges were designed each by a different architect, or they were designed by a late night group of Yale students who were drunk in the middle of the night, and they had a competition to design different bridges. But in fact, they were all designed by Dunkelberger. And for each crossing that he designed, he presented to the Merritt Parkway Commission 2 different designs. So in essence, there were over 140 bridges that came out of his head for the Merritt Parkway. His guiding principles were that he wanted bridges that were pleasing to the eye. He also wanted to make a radical departure, and that was probably the policy of the Merritt Parkway Commission from what high-rate bridges had been in the past. And he wanted them all to be individual in character, and they certainly were. Now, he lived in a design world that was influenced by 2 overwhelming international fairs that occurred during his lifetime. The first was the World Columbian Exposition in Chicago that more or less rebooted the redesign of Washington, D.C. In the classical vocabulary of architecture, and kind of established a sense of site planning where buildings would react to one another with classical, their situation, their placement. So Dunkelberger was sort of educated in that background. And then when he was in practice, the Paris Exposition of 1925 introduced the Art Deco movement to the Western Europe and the United States. And Art Deco was a variation on classical vocabulary that was much more freer form and much more modern looking. So Dunkelberger kind of brought these two different currents in contemporary design together to work for him for the Merritt Parkway bridges. Bridges in the previous generations had either been designed in a very rustic look when they were put in parks, or a very whimsical look. If you are familiar with Central Park by Frederick Law Olmsted in New York City, the bridges there were all different in design, but they were of a very much older vocabulary. So Dunkelberger really ended up designing the last iteration of what today is known as the City Beautiful movement, which Olmsted started with Central Park, which was given a huge kick, a jump start with the Chicago World's Fair. And then Dunkelberger did it with a lot of Art Deco expression. So it's a very unusual place, the Merritt Parkway, because of its bridges. So we'll take a look at some of the neoclassical bridges. Most bridges in Western history have not had architectural embellishments, but beginning with ancient Rome, this is 20 years before our current era, bridges began to be articulated with architectural expressions. The Romans had perfected the structural system of the arch, and then they began to ornament their bridges with certain things. And Dunkelberger was picking up on this ancient tradition with the Merritt Parkway bridges. In concrete, he was imitating some of the ashlar stone. You can see the blocks of stone that are laid out in a very organized pattern. He used a lot of corbels. Corbels are stones that stick out and support other stones that project out over the primary plane of a surface to create interesting shadow and to protect it from water. He used a lot of corbelling in concrete, not in stone. He also used ornamental niches on a lot of the Parkway bridges. So as you drive along there, you'll see these random niches. I mean, obviously no one's going to go stand there, nobody's going to put a statue in them. They're just there for ornamental purpose. The Romans were really pretty much limited to the round Roman arch, which again, they were used for spanning water, and they looked very beautiful, and they formed these beautiful reflective circles. In the Renaissance, the Italian culture looked back on ancient Rome and learned some lessons and borrowed some vocabulary from them. And this is a Renaissance, a very famous Renaissance bridge by Michelangelo in Florence that carried on some of the traditions, but you can see how Michelangelo changed it. He abandons the round arch, which is very narrow, and the rivers in Florence were used as the primary transportation system, and so you needed a wider opening. So Michelangelo is basically credited with introducing the first elliptical arch in bridge design, which Dunkelberger would use on the Merritt Parkway. For a river bridge here, there are these projections that stick out from the piers that are called cutwaters. They're meant to divide the water as it flows under the opening underneath the bridge. And even though Dunkelberger wasn't dealing with water, he introduced cutwaters on a couple of bridges just for architectural effect. In the center of the span, the Renaissance architects often used a feature called a cartouche, which was some sort of medallion, a symbolic medallion that had maybe the city symbol on it or some inscription, and Michelangelo used one here, and Dunkelberger used the State Seal of Connecticut as a cartouche on many of the Merritt Parkway bridges. So by the time the impact of the Columbian World's Fair, and when Dunkelberger starts putting pen to paper, This was pretty much the state of how architects were embracing classicism and Renaissance vocabulary in contemporary bridges. The very famous New York firm of McKim, White had just finished the bridge that runs between Washington, D.C. and Arlington Cemetery that was done very much like Michelangelo's bridge, with large elliptical arches and medallions and relief sculpture in between the piers. And Dunkelberger uses that same sort of treatment on a couple of bridges. This is the in Westport on the Parkway, a Newtown Turnpike Bridge. It's very similar to the McKim, White Bridge in DC, with these very long arches. And but this was all faced in concrete. The Washington DC bridge was faced in marble, but Dunkelberger was working with concrete. And this big bridge has recently been refaced with a new material, very, very closely resembling the original treatment of it. The cast stone that was used on it began to fail about 10 years ago. And you may remember this bridge, if you've been down there in the last 5 years, is being boarded up with just boards. And it was just unveiled this spring with a completely new facing on it. So this is one of the most recent restorations that the Conservancy and DOT were partners in completing. So we'll start looking at some of the of how Dunkelberger worked with classical bridges. And this is the first bridge that you encounter coming in from the New York line, the Roundhill Road bridge in Greenwich. And it features some niches, as does the Sport Hill Road Bridge in Fairfield. It has niches on the piers on either side of it, sort of like we saw in that early bridge from antiquity in Rimini, Italy. And this is what they look like now. Now, obviously, that's a little Juliet balcony over on the left from the Sport Hill Bridge. No one it's not really designed for making a speech or anything. It's really just an architectural piece of whimsy. And it's a very kind of modern interpretation of a classical niche on the Roundhill Road Bridge on the right here. In Trumbull, I mentioned Cutwaters before. The Frenchtown Road is a bridge that has one of those cutwaters, and obviously it's not dividing any water, but it's just an architectural feature that is found in many Renaissance bridges in Paris, in Italy, in London. So this is just a wonderful, and this is all cast stone. It's a very, very beautiful bridge. Now, another thing that the Italians did in the Renaissance was to ornament their bridges beginning in Venice with relief sculpture. So to use the bridges sort of as a canvas to do three-dimensional relief sculpture on it, to symbolizing different things, not just cartouches, but actually embellishing them. And you'll find this a lot on the Merritt Parkway bridges, which we'll be looking at in a minute. Also, the Rialto Bridge in Venice was a really radical departure, because this was the largest and widest span of a bridge. Venice was the most intensively used canal system in Western Europe at the time that this bridge went up, and the architect Ponte figured out a way to span this so that the most gondolas could fit through this bridge at any one point in time. And that's pretty similar to what Dunkelberger was doing with automobiles on the Parkway. And this bridge also features a balustrade because it was intensively used for foot traffic from the street to get across the canals, and the pedestrians had to stay inside. The Merritt's bridges aren't really used that much for foot traffic, but the balustrades still persist on the Parkway bridges. So here are a couple of more Renaissance revival-like bridges. The Ponies Ridge Underpass, which is a pretty simple classical revival bridge. This isn't real stone or blocks. These are scored out of cast stone, and they're put in place. And you can see that in 2014, the Ponies Ridge Underpass was looking a little bit crumbly over on the right. A lot of the bridges do get hit by trucks. We're trying to get the trucks off the parkway, even though they're banned. GPS sends trucks up onto the parkway with truck drivers that aren't aware that the parkway is restricted. And so when we address a bridge, as we did this bridge about 5 years ago, we patch the kind of damaged work. And so the upper part is before restoration and the lower part is after restoration. And over on the right is a pretty typical Dunkelberger cartouche with the state seal of Connecticut on it. So when you're driving along the parkway, you can sort of, look for these kind of details on the bridges. Another neoclassical bridge with some relief sculpture and cartouches that are on the piers that are a little bit more different. They're a little bit more modern. Stanwich Road is one of my favorite bridges in Greenwich. It's right on the Stamford Greenwich line. And it has these wonderful cartouches. I don't know if you can see my cursor circling it over here, that are shaped in a very, very novel way. They're shaped like early automobile keys that were just coming in. It's an ignition key that then has a wing tire in it, which was an early symbol of mechanized vehicles. And so it's kind of celebrating that this is a bridge for the automobile age. And it's this kind of detail that really makes the parkway jump out from other roads that have interesting bridges within them, because this one really does celebrate that we're in the automobile age. This is a road expressively built for automobiles. In Greenwich, this is a very, very chaste and very simple classical treatment, North Street Underpass. And this detail shows you just how Dunkelberger accomplished the kind of suggestion. When you look at it closer, you can see that it really doesn't look at all like stone, and the balustrade is really reduced down to its primary lines. It's just scoring on the concrete to create the arch, the stones there, simulating the stones in an arch. So it's a very, very simple treatment and very elegant. Main Street Underpass in Trumbull is another very, very simple classical one. And here, Dunkelberger doesn't really even suggest the vertical lines in ashlar blocks. He just scores it with horizontal lines to give a very, very streamlined modern look to it. So this is a classical bridge with a lot of Art Moderne and Art Deco influence in it. The Marvin Ridge Underpass in Norwalk is one that's scheduled for restoration beginning next year. And it is a bridge that has a balustrade that's really all solid concrete. And really the only decorative feature on it are these little inset urns that are set in a blue field that will be restored as well. So that's the kind of relief sculpture that Dunkelberger did in his more simple and pulled back mode. Here it is, a detail of it, sort of a neoclassical Adam-esque urn. And then we move on to the Art Deco bridges. So Dunkelberger was taking a lot of his ideas for massing the terminations of the spans, where they either met at the median or they met over on the sides, on the shoulders, from what was going on in contemporary architecture. Rockefeller Center and the New Yorker Hotel on the right really do convey a sense of the way that urban planning was moving to having a lot of setbacks in skyscrapers, creating these very heavy buildings with these really dramatic shadow play of setbacks and sculpture. And even contemporary sculpture was starting to imitate that in certain degrees. So Dunkelberger was riffing on all of that in the way he was modeling some of his more, or some of his less classical bridges and some of his more Art Deco bridge. Congress Street Underpass in Fairfield is one of the best examples of this. You can see the shadow play pretty much in the sort of spacing. The ballast, it's no longer a classical balustrade across, it's a solid composition of setbacks and projections that creates kind of dramatic shadow play. And the pylons are really compositions that look like skyscrapers, little mini skyscrapers on the side. Riverbank Road is probably the most exuberant of Dunkelberger's bridges, and it was also the one that was most criticized by the new movement that was starting out with the Bauhaus of kind of minimalist mid-century modern architecture. They found that this was, the mid-century architects found this completely unnecessary, but I think it's just a wonderful celebration of shadow play and compositional massing. Newfield Avenue underpass is a very, very chaste Art Deco. You can see how where the bridge hits the shoulders are called wing walls, and how basically Dunkelberger sets them back in a series of receding planes on this bridge. That's very, very simple, but not really done at all commonly. It didn't really cost all that more, but it adds a lot of architectural interest to what would otherwise be a pretty simple concrete bridge. And then with the pylons that are holding the span, where all the load is being transferred to for the span, he puts in these very, very simple flutes, vertical flutes. So it's a really wonderful composition with a lot of cool shadow play on it. This is what it looks like today in a photograph where you can see some of the horizontal elements a little bit better. And you can see that he's got some rounded elements on those that balustrade there, and also a cartouche in the middle of it as well. The New Canaan Railroad underpass, this is where Metro North Line to New Canaan crosses the Parkway. And because that was a much heavier bridge, he put a center span in on the median. Only a few bridges have center spans on the Parkway. And this one was because it carried a railroad train across it. But it's still a very simple and elegant Art Deco design. And then some of the bridges that you don't really see unless you're on the side streets are really wonderful expressions of Art Moderne and Art Deco styling. This is in Westport. It goes underneath the Parkway. It carries the Parkway over a side road. And it's a wonderful play with a lot of horizontal lines. Now, there was another aspect of Art Deco, which was the use of curves and not just straight lines. And that was because the 1925 Paris Fair featured a number of fountains that were central to the fair, and they got kind of abstracted after the fair into a lot of different motifs that have a lot of intersecting half circles with them. These are two of the fair's most famous fountains. One was the centerpiece of the fair on the left, and the other was a glass fountain. It was a fountain of perfume that was designed by the glass artist Lalique to circulate perfume through the pavilion that it was in. A very French thing to do, not a very American thing to do. But those kind of curving, robust kind of fountain-like features show up on some of the Merritt Parkway bridges. South Ave, and especially in New Canaan. New Canaan has the best collection of these. If you go through New Canaan, try to drive slow and take a look, because these have some great details on them. This is South Avenue underpass, which is very much a riff on the fountain, the central fountain at Paris, with a bunch of swirling waves of water coming up a vertical centerpiece there. And that's what Dunkelberger derived this detail from. But another detail on this bridge is the sort of quarter sunburst which was an Aztec revival feature that also came out of the Paris 1925 Paris World Fair at this pavilion. And architects really played with this beautiful sunburst detail in a lot of ways. And if you walk around New York City and look at buildings from the 20s and the 30s, you can see this worked into entryways and elevator lobbies and elevators. And here we have it on the Merritt Parkway, which is, and a few federal and a few state buildings in Hartford, but not too much outside of that, maybe a few banks around. White Oak Shade in New Canaan is another bridge that features the fountain motif. This one's probably more like the Lalique motif, not a strict copy, but it's definitely a fountain motif that that the architect is playing with here. And North Avenue Underpass is probably one of the most playful of all the bridges with the fountain motif. That's what it looked like originally. This is what it looks like today. You can see that it's worked in actually it's a polychromatic mortar that's set in called sgraffito, and the wave motif is sort of set in profile, running up a vertical line like a fountain. And then he even works in the wave motif into the ironwork on the railings of this bridge, which are really quite playful. The ironwork on the Parkway is is quite wonderful and one of the least appreciated features of the Parkway. Wiremill Road, this was another way of dealing with curves. Wiremill is one of two bridges that really features a prominent curve with it. The wing walls here kind of widen out in a kind of embrace the traffic as you're approaching it. This is what it looked like about 6 years ago. And this is what it looked like after it was repaired in the last 5 years by DOT and the Conservancy and patched up. But it's a wonderful sort of playful, curving, swooping, unlike any other bridge on the Parkway. And in Stratford, this one, you need to get off the Parkway, and I really urge you to do that. It's the last exit on the Merritt before you hit the Sikorsky Bridge. And this is the bridge that carries the Merritt over. And it is such a really unusual bridge. It feels more like it's Southern California than Connecticut, with these overscaled, wild, flat plants that are kind of creeping up the main structural system, and then terminating in these almost Warner Brothers like. It reminds me of the end of Looney Tunes, when Daffy Duck jumps out and says, "That's all, folks." These wonderful bands, and they're all polychromatic. It's really an unusual bridge, and I don't know why this bridge got that treatment. Perhaps Sikorsky expressed an interest in it because the Sikorsky plant was there, but much smaller at the time the Parkway was built. The East Rocks Underpass also has a kind of a rectilinear iteration of a fountain on its pylons on the side, which we really, they're harder to see today. This happens to be an early photograph when the concrete work was very, very crisp, and you could really see the shadow play, but it's really quite a wonderful kind of iteration of that. Frank Lloyd Wright had designed a building in Los Angeles in 1923 using precast blocks with a kind of an Inca Aztec kind of motif in them. And the Morehouse Highway Bridge that Dunkelberger does takes its cue from that in the railings and some of the treatment on the bridge. It's really quite an interesting and unusual bridge. It sort of stands apart from all the other bridges on the Parkway in its both its shape, and that it sort of steps up the hill to make a change in grade between the two sides of the Parkway with this very, very primitive looking form of decoration. And the relief sculpture that I mentioned that came in Venice is all over the Parkway bridges in different ways. The urn we saw earlier, the fountain motif. It's just a feast for the eyes. I just love, when I was in high school and driving it for the first time, it seemed like every couple of days I'd notice a new bridge, or it was a bridge I'd gone under many times, but I'd notice it because the light would hit it in a different way, and all of a sudden the details on it would pop. And I think it makes just driving a real pleasure on the Parkway. It was also common during the 20s and the 30s to introduce relief sculpture symbolizing different aspects of Western civilization onto buildings. At Rockefeller Center, the design team there had sort of a history of artisans and tradesmen on a band around the base, representing the different trades that went into constructing the building. And Dunkelberger did that on the Burr Street Bridge with two panels. On one side are the workmen that actually constructed the bridge. So he kind of puts in a memorial to honor them. On the other side are the civil engineers who laid out and surveyed the Parkway layout. The Comstock Hill Bridge is also really unusual. The Parkway coincided with the tetracentennial of New Haven, of the founding of New Haven. So this was kind of a commemoration of that aspect, that it was when European culture kind of collided with indigenous culture, not very happily at first, but it was memorialized on the Comstock Hill Road Bridge, which is the narrowest bridge on the Parkway. It serves a very rural neighborhood, a neighborhood of only a few houses, and this was modeled by a father and son team of Italian sculptors. The father was born in Italian and came over here, and the son was a graduate of the Yale School of Arts and followed in his father's footsteps. And it's really quite beautiful sculpture. Another bridge that kind of stands on its own and doesn't really fall in any stylistic category is the Merwin's Lane in Fairfield. It's very unusual because it sort of celebrates insects. And the ironwork up at the top are spider webs and flies. And then a large sort of butterfly is perched up on a little perch on the main wing wall of the sides. It also has this really unusual casting in that it's not simulating ashlar stone, it's simulating clapboard. It looks more like a bunch of overlaying boards on one another. And so it's a completely whimsical and a very singular composition on the Parkway. One of my favorites is Madison Avenue. I've always loved this bridge. This one is almost the bridge, instead of just having relief sculpture, sort of like some of the earlier bridges, this bridge almost becomes a complete work of sculpture into itself. I'm not really sure if he was trying to simulate waves of water, or if he was simulating a kind of a wave of textiles across the bridge. But it looks like a folded textile. It looks almost like it could just be blowing in the wind up there. And it's really quite a beautiful bridge, but with just a couple of little classical references in the wing wall. A very, very lovely bridge. And then perhaps the most famous of the bridges on the Parkway, the most recognizable, is the James Farm Road Bridge. And that's the first bridge you encounter coming in from the Sikorsky Bridge. This was an intentional monument to the civil engineers who designed and laid out the parkway. The Nike wings are the symbol of civil engineering, and they were modeled on the classical statue from antiquity of Nike, but turned on their side and put in an upright position. And this is the sculpture, the plaster mock-up that was used to create the molds to cast the wings in concrete. These wings will probably need to be replaced. We will replace them exactly in kind, and because they are starting to dissemble themselves a little bit. So I just want to walk you through a couple of restoration projects we've done recently. A lot of if you've seen a couple of the projects that we've done already that we've done patching on, sometimes when we come to a bridge and it doesn't really need a lot of patching, we'll just do cleaning. And cleaning is pretty, the science of cleaning has really gotten to be quite good and portable. The bridges are cleaned with, basically they're blasted with pieces of sponge, and the sponge absorbs all the surface dirt and pollution, and takes it in and doesn't erode the surface of the bridge. So this is the Reading Underpass, a very simple but elegant bridge in Fairfield that was sponge blasted about 2 years ago, and the before and the after here, how well it cleaned up. One of the major bridges that we recently did was the Lake Avenue Bridge in Greenwich. This was one of the last bridges put on the Parkway, and it was unusual in the sense because it had more cast iron on it than all the other bridges. But the steel span on this bridge had been determined structurally deficient from about 2012, when we went in and we did material investigation on the ironwork to try to determine the original paint scheme. We found traces of the paint. We hired an architectural conservator from New York. She took samples, looked under the microscope, and matched the colors of the original bridge exactly, and that's how it turned out. This bridge was completely taken apart. All the cast iron was taken off. Cast iron is very brittle, and we were very afraid that the cast iron would break, but the contractor was excellent on this job and handled it really with kid gloves, and took it to a shop, had it sponge blasted down to bare metal, and then painted in the shop with numerous layers of paint, and it matches the original color scheme. This in the hand on the left is what the sponge media looks like. The urn in the second to the right is what the bridge looked like, a piece of it when it was out for sponge blasting. This was the mock-up of the color scheme that was based on the conservator's report, and that's what the urn looked like after it was treated in the shop. And the bridge was completed ahead of schedule. This was really important because the entire span had to be taken out of service for the period of time that it was being restored. And it was a really happy day when the Conservancy and DOT and the contractor and the local politicians all got together, and we reopened the bridge about a week ahead of schedule. The bridge was used by school buses, and the school buses could start rolling again without a very, very elaborate detour. Our most recent completed project is the Clinton Avenue Bridge, which is also one of the most unusual bridges on the Parkway. The bridges, the concrete on this was originally two-toned. Those little diamonds up at the top on the left and the right were inset pieces of red mortar with red glass set in them, so that at night when you drove by, they'd kind of have a little bit of reflectance in them. They got lost over the years, and basically painted over. And but we did find evidence of them, and we matched the color exactly with the glass shards in them. We matched the mortar around them, which was meant to look like Stony Creek granite, that beautiful pink granite that you get down near Guilford and Branford. And then we painted the lower sections with a mineral painting that was matched to the color scheme up above. And this is what the bridge, the finished bridge, looks like. Just a couple of months ago, it reopened. It was completed. This was never taken out of service, but the contractor completed the project a couple of months ago. So that is the end of the tour. But if you want to know the Merritt better, the Conservancy publishes a guide to the Merritt Parkway. And we would be happy to send you a free guide if you contact me by email at Wes@Merritt Parkway. We will be happy to put one in the mail to you. And now I am ready to take any questions that you might have about the bridges or anything else about the Parkway.
Hey Wes, this is Ann. Thank you so much for that. That's amazing. And I think if anybody else feels the same way I do about your presentation, the speed limit on the Merritt tomorrow is going to slow way down with people driving and picking out some of the details that you mentioned tonight. I for one, can't wait to go and take a drive and pick out some of these details. So just in brief, thank you very much. Stephen asks, a few of the bridges also display ornament beneath the spans. Could you comment on this as well?
Yes, and I didn't go into that tonight, but yes, some of them, the Dunkelberger carried them under the spans, and I have no idea why. They're not particularly evident. The spans were never lit underneath, and so there was not a lot of shadow play there. So that's a mystery to me too, that an unresolved mystery. I really don't know why he did it. I can't answer that one, sorry.
Oh, fair enough. Susan and Tom want to know, is there any book on the bridges? They always thought that they would make for an excellent coffee table book. Thank you for your presentation, so educational and interesting, and also the restoration work has been amazing.
Well, thank you very much. There is no specific book on it, but you can access many of the original photographs online at the Library of Congress. The Historic American Engineering Record recorded the bridges, and by that I mean they did measured drawings of the bridges back in the 1990s, and when the restoration effort was starting off, and they have drawings of the bridges, and you can download the entire report, which isn't really a coffee table book; it's a government report in TypeScript. There are a couple of good books on the Parkway. Here, I can just get them from my desk over here. And I can recommend two. One is out of print, but you can still get it today. It's by an author by the name of Bruce Radd. It looks like this, and you might even have it in the library. And it's really got, it's got the history of the art. It's a really great history of the artistic aspects of the Parkway. And then my two predecessors as executive director at the Parkway collaborated on this book, which is just on sort of the overall history of the Parkway. It goes into a little bit about Dunkelberger and the design of the bridges. It's called The Merritt Parkway, The Road That Shaped a Region, by Lori Heiss, Heiss, and Jill Smith, Smyth. And it's a really good book. And that one is still in print, so you can get that.
Yes, I saw those on our Baker and Taylor vendor this evening. So we will get those for the library if anybody wants to come in and borrow one. James says, there's one more about that. Elaine asks, I understood that Senator Merritt was from Fairfield, and that is why there were no exits in Fairfield, as the locals, his constituents, objected to having exiting traffic. Is this true?
You've got the story is generally right, except Schuyler Merritt was from Stamford. but the people in Fairfield did not want an exit. The Merritt was being laid out at the first time that our first coastal state park was being laid out, which was Sherwood Island in Westport. And the people in Greenfield Hill did not want an exit there that would attract traffic through their neighborhood. So they protested. There was an exit planned in Fairfield, but it was never executed. And Merritt probably cut the deal, saying, if this is going to hold up the parkway, we'll just take away the exit. But Schuyler Merritt was the only politician. He was an old man when he basically was the head of the Merritt Parkway Commission. He was in his late 70s and early 80s. And he was the only person with enough clout in Fairfield County to get all the townships to get on board with this new road. I mean, just think how disruptive this was to everybody. Nobody really wanted it. A lot of people were Parkway skeptics. And the only way they could get this road built was to make sure that it was a beautiful road. And that was part of Merritt's pitch. He had a very high sense of aesthetics. He summered in the Adirondacks. So did his major ally in the state assembly, Helen Binney Kitchell from Greenwich. And the two of them worked together to get the appropriations for this. And to get the highway department on board with it. So the parkway was largely, there's a rumor that the parkway was funded by WPA funds. It wasn't really, it was financed by a loan from a WPA program, but there was not a WPA grant. It was Fairfield County bonds that paid for the parkway for the most of it, with some support from the state. Only 2% was grant money from the WPA. So they didn't really have to follow the federal guidelines, and Merritt had a lot of latitude on what they could do with cutting out exits for people that didn't want the exit in it. That was one of two exits that were cut out of the other. And I don't know the reason why the second exit was cut out. I've never been able to find that.
That's really interesting. Was there some money that needed to be set aside for ornament in the financing of the parkway?
No, the 2% of the WPA was mostly for artists to draw the parkway during the construction. There were a couple of artists that actually got paid to do watercolors of all the what looks crazy to us today, all the steam, bulldozers and shovels, and they're really beautiful. There a lot of them are up in the Dodd archives at UConn, and photographers to come and take photographs of it. But what didn't go actually to the physical ornamentation of the parkway, and it is so highly ornamented. You think that the only entity that would have the funds to do that would be the federal government, but that was all the state of Connecticut and Fairfield County that wanted that ornament on the parkway.
Oh, wow. Very curious. I have more questions about that, but I want to get to our audience's questions. Patricia says, all the restorations were beautifully done, especially the Lake Avenue Bridge. And James says, did I hear correctly that 2 of the bridges have been removed? And do you have any more information about why that is?
One was moved for, I think it was Route 25 interchange. And the other, I can't remember off the top of my head why that was removed, but one of them did bite the dust with the Route 25 interchange in Trumbull.
Okay. Diane says, could you please explain how the National Register listing affects how the bridges can be renovated? Can they be changed in any way?
Oh, they can be changed. So in 1966, the federal government made historic preservation federal policy so that it didn't apply. It applies to a certain degree to private property. You can have a private property put on the National Register of Historic Places, but when a federal or a publicly owned property that was receiving federal funding for any work was put on the National Register, it has to the work has to comply with a set of standards called the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. And it doesn't compel restoration, but it lays out a number of guiding principles, such as if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Pretty much replace in kind if you have to replace something. And it does allow some latitude to modify things. So on some of the bridges, we have increased the strength of the bridges very, very subtly without being visible. It also, unfortunately, because we have a state statute that requires fencing to go on the bridges for safety reasons and to prevent things to be thrown on the highway because it's designated as a federal highway. Even though that's not part of the restoration, we just have to sort of accept that as part of the projects. We're trying to get the design of that changed so it's a little bit less in your face. But so it doesn't compel strict restoration, but it does urge preservation of the bridge and preservation of the general architectural character of the bridge. And in most cases, DOT has worked really closely with us to make sure that the bridges are restored as closely as possible to their original appearance, and whenever we have the opportunity to do that. Does that answer your question about how the National Register works with things?
I'm going to take an administrative decision and say yes, but okay. Diane is welcome to ask again further or further rephrase her question. Eva has asked very kindly if you would put back up on the screen the slide about, there you go. And we will definitely be maybe asking for a few of those so that we can make them available for library patrons. While people are writing down that information, could you speak to why the bridges were all done with concrete?
It was mostly done for economy. I think when they started out, their eyes were bigger than their pocketbooks. When they did the Guinea Road Bridge, there are only 4 bridges that are faced with natural stone on the Parkway. 2 of them are under the Parkway, and Guinea Road is that, and Lake Avenue is another one that has stone facing on it. They're the 4 bridges. One of them was happened to be within the view of Gutzon Borglum, the sculptor of Mount Rushmore, who lived in Stamford, and the Parkway right-of-way cut across his property. And the only way he would give the state turn over the title of his property to the state for the Parkway, he insisted on having the bridge that he looked at built out of stone. So you can't see that bridge from anywhere except for his house, which is crazy. But that's why it was. But concrete, was coming in to becoming a very important construction material. From the 1890s, there have been all sorts of experiments with structural concrete. And by the 1930s, it was pretty clear that it was the most economical way to build a bridge. And it was to the credit of the Merritt Parkway design team that they used it more like a plastic material to put in all this relief sculpture, this ornamentation. They used it very creatively, unlike most of its applications. So it was economy. It was dollars and cents.
For sure. So I think we've got a lot of really lovely comments, which I second and third for certain, but I did have a couple of questions about the fabrication, and one comment, which is for the state of Connecticut, we are entirely and incredibly grateful for their ability to put these marvelous bridges on this fantastic parkway. It would never be able to be built again the way it was back then. And so can you give any background to, aside from the 2 folks who were the champions of the Parkway, how they got the state, the Department of Transportation to go along. It's not like they just had a catalog for Dunkelberger to go through and pick out, let's use this one and this one in terms of even the ornament or materials. And then also talk about anything you might think on the top of your head about who the fabricators were. So who did the state go to for the ironworks and some of the concrete fabrication? Did they use the same people all the way through on the bridges, or did they, have a selection process?
So I'll answer the first question first. The process of I've already forgotten the first question, but
just the catalog of, how did Dunkelberger choose?
Yeah. So the reason why this parkway looks different than any other road in Connecticut, it is the first limited access highway in Connecticut. And prior to really the end of World War II, there was a different philosophy within departments of transportation about highways. There was something called the Good Roads Movement, and there was also a subset of that called the Anti-Billboard Movement. And there was an idea that if you were going to put in a highway, you try to do it the way you would put in a post office in downtown. You would go for excellence in design. And it just happened that the Parkway was one of the last gasps of that good road movement in the United States. Because after World War II, the most departments of highways adopted a kind of a mantra of safety, efficiency, and economy, and dropped out any reference to beauty. Beauty just went by the wayside. So I-95 was built under a completely different set of guiding principles than the Merritt Parkway was. And so it wasn't really just Connecticut. We also had James McDonald was the commissioner of transportation, and he was a visionary guy. There's a monument to him somewhere in upstate Connecticut. I want to get to it sometime. He really kind of put together the idea of good roads in Connecticut. And we're still very early in the automobile is a disruptive thing. It comes in pretty quickly in 1902, and all of a sudden we have to adopt all these roads or adapt all these roads to a brand new kind of machine that didn't exist before. And we're only like 30 years out of that when the Parkway planning gets done. And it's really the first major road in Connecticut that's built. So made on a completely new course. There was no road there before, unlike Route 1 that got widened and widened, and I-95, which sort of follows Route 1. There was no road that went across the pathway of the Merritt Parkway. So there was a lot of pressure to make it beautiful and do that. In terms of the iron work, I know that the iron maker for the Lake Avenue Bridge was James Lynch, who had done the gargoyles on the Chrysler Building. So he was used to working with architectural metal. And if any of you know Wilton very well, he ended up moving to Wilton after the Parkway was built and had an ironworks shop where he sold ornamental ironwork. So he was there. He was a fixture when I was a kid on the road up to Wilton from Norwalk. The Ferraris were the sculptors who did the modeling for that was the father and son, and the son did most of the modeling for all the owl that I showed you, all the relief work that was on the bridges, not just the Comstock Hill Road Bridge with the Pilgrim and the Native American, but all the different character reliefs, the bugs on the Merwin's Lane Bridge, and all the other details that were really kind of clever. And so he had his own sculpture studio and would work either in wood or plaster, and then create the molds for the contractors to do it. Many of the bridges were built by, there were about 7 contractors that were construction contractors. One of them is still in business today in Stamford, DeLuca Construction. They built 3 or 4 of the bridges. So they were let out to different contractors that employed a lot of people. The Parkway put a lot of people to work during the Depression, and they were very proud of it. Some of them still talk. The ones that are still in business today still say, we helped build the Merritt Parkway with a lot of pride, and rightly so.
Absolutely. We've got one final question, though I could go on. So I will avoid. I'll just quietly make you promise to come back and give another presentation. Is it true that there were wildflowers sown along the Parkway as part of an Eleanor Roosevelt project?
I've never heard that. And I don't really associate Eleanor Roosevelt with wildflowers. I associate that with Lady Bird Johnson.
Yeah,
he was the one that really kind of did that, and I don't recall that. If there were, they didn't survive very well. And right now, because we're trying to, prohibit or prevent the deer to come down to the side of the road, the planting is very strategic to keep the stuff that they like to eat back from the travel lanes as much as possible. Since we can't really keep the deer off or any of the wildlife off the Parkway. There was a lot more flowering understory when the Parkway was first built. It was wildly overplanted with mountain laurels, which proved to be really not tolerant to salt. And so we don't have many mountain laurels left. The dogwoods, we had a blight about 25 years ago that took out a lot of the dogwoods, the native dogwoods. And they've been replanted with more tolerant species. But we don't have as much color on the Parkway now as we did. And that's one of the objectives of the Conservancy. We're trying to find a way to get something the deer doesn't like to eat, something that's salt resistant, and something that's beautiful back within the view of the driving public.
Those would be excellent goals. I do remember back in the 60s and 70s along the Parkway, having it be very lush with mountain laurel and enjoying the dogwoods when they were in bloom as well. So those are wonderful goals to have. So I wish you the best of luck with that. I will let everybody go, but I do want to say multiple people have said how wonderful the presentation was. Loved the photographs. The commentary was perfect. Wonderful presentation. Thank you. Wes, I can't thank you enough. It really was fascinating. And I now believe truly, among all the other wonderful things that we have in Connecticut, that if you don't have a chance to, please take a day or a few days and go look at what really is this national treasure, the Merritt Parkway, and somehow find a way to, if not technically, keep it in your mind that the Merritt Parkway Conservancy is helping keep this alive and healthy and well for all of us. Thank you, Wes, so much. I hope to see you again soon. We'll talk.
Okay,
thank you everybody for joining us tonight.
Thanks for the great questions tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. And everybody else. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.